Hello, and welcome back to yet another episode of Literally My Life, my guide to girlhood. Thank you so much for tuning in. I love everybody who just tunes in every week and all my loyal listeners. I love you all. Okay, so today's episode is titled Moving On. I announced this yesterday on Literally My Life's Instagram. If you don't, you need to follow at Literally My Life MGTG on Instagram. That's at Literally My Life MGTG on Instagram. That account is pretty active. I try to post on there a lot more. I'm still kind of coming up with the concept of what I want the Instagram to look like, but I'm getting ideas from other podcast Instagrams to so that I stay interactive with you guys. And I think it's slowly but surely coming together. But I announced the idea of the episode because I was texting my best friend. I'm ranting now, but I was just texting my best friend and she suggested that I do an episode on moving on because of an experience she had that I will be talking about. So I'm very, very excited to be doing this episode. Before we get into it, again, follow at Literally My Life MGTG on Instagram so that you can stay up to date with me and all things Literally My Life, my guide to girlhood. And with that, let's get into the episode. Okay, so like happiness and healing and other things that we've talked about, moving on has its own definition. Everybody has their own definition of moving on. To me, moving on is acceptance, accepting a part in your life. And I could do a whole other episode on acceptance, and matter of fact, I might. But to me, moving on is accepting a situation for what it is and accepting that you can't change or that you can't control the situation. Because half the time, the stuff, I know for me, the stuff that I stress about is stuff I can't control. And so I've learned recently how to accept things that I can't control. Or to kind of quote the Serenity Prayer, which we quoted a couple of episodes ago. I can't even remember. I just remember saying it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so the Serenity Prayer, I kid you not, is just, that's the definition of moving on to me. Accepting the things I cannot change, changing the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Oh my goodness, I love the Serenity Prayer. I love it. And it's so sad that I always have to look it up. But I know the concept in my heart, and that's what matters. I also truly believe there's a psychological and emotional significance in moving on. Absolutely. Because, and I'm always talking about my personal experiences. I want this to be relatable, but I don't want to talk for everyone. But in my opinion, and in my experiences, most importantly, I notice that I feel lighter. I feel like a burden has kind of been lifted off of me. And for some reason, this just came to my head. I'm sure we've all seen that video of Judge Judy telling someone oh, you're 19? You look older. That's not a compliment. You look troubled. And that's how I feel when I'm stuck to something, especially a person who's not stuck to me or stuck to something like that. I feel I'm holding a burden, there's this big weight on my shoulders. And it's very, very hard for me to get rid of it. And then when you move on, when you accept a situation like it is, and just accept that you can't change the past, accept that you can't control it, I feel that burden has been released. I can just take a breath of fresh air. And it's so soothing and it's so relieving. And I feel I can process whenever new stuff comes at me. Because this used to happen to me a lot. If something used to happen to me and it used to upset me, I would cry. But I would partially cry because of stuff I was already holding on to, because of burdens I was already carrying. So when I would cry, it would be 50% of whatever I was presented with, whether it was oh, I just failed a test, or I'm really upset about I can't make my bed up the right way or whatever, because I'm a crier. I'll just cry it out and move on. It would be 50% of that, and then it would be 50% of this burden I was carrying, and it would just make dealing with new stuff so hard to me because I was carrying such a big weight on my shoulders, and it was exhausting. And then to have that, like I said, just have that release for me, it felt like a breath of fresh air. Like I finally got to move. Like I finally got to breathe. And it was so relieving, and I'm so happy that it happened. And I think it is really necessary to move on for your personal well-being, for your self-health, for your self-care and your mental health. It's necessary, and it's challenging. It's so hard, but it's necessary. And people used to say to me like, oh, Alex, you know what? It feels like it's the end of the world, but it's not. And I used to be like, but it is the end of the world. Like, my life is over. Like, what do you mean? Like, I can't seem to pass. One thing I struggled with last year is I sucked at chemistry. So it'd be like, I cannot seem to pass a chemistry class. I'm not going to finish with a good grade. I'm not going to get into college. This is the end of the world. And it's not. It's not the end of the world. Even though things feel like the end of the world, they're not the end of the world. And another thing people used to say to me that I used to hate is that time heals all wounds. And I used to write, and I used to, like, because you guys know I write poetry, so I used to write poems, and I used to listen to Death by a Thousand Cuts, and I used to be like, you know, time heals all wounds, but it won't heal this one. Like, time heals, but it won't heal this one. And it did, eventually. It took a lot of time, but it did, and I feel so much better, and I feel so much happier. And I know that even though at the time I didn't want to move on, I felt like really stuck on a person and on a situation, I'm glad that it happened because it was necessary for my mental health and for my well-being and for me to move on and to go on. Just necessary. It just had to happen. And I'm really glad that it did happen. Okay, guys, so I did actual research on the science behind moving on. So you better listen to this because this is what I've come up with in my research, okay? So there are 4 main psychological and neurological processes involved in moving on. Cognitive adaptation, emotional regulation, memory reconsolidation, and neuroplasticity. Okay, so moving on often involves cognitive processes such as reframing past experiences, adjusting expectations, and developing new perspectives on oneself and others. That's mostly cognitive adaptation. So me, what I've processed from that is that's just acceptance. That's just like your brain coming to an accepting state, in my opinion. Okay, so emotional regulation. So moving on requires individuals to manage and regulate their emotions, including coping with grief, disappointment, or anger, and fostering feelings of acceptance and peace. That's true. Accepting peace. I love that one. Okay, memory reconsolidation. Okay. Neurologically, moving on may involve the process of memory reconsolidation, where existing memories associated with past experiences are modified or integrated with new information, leading to a shift in emotional responses and behaviors. Okay, I think that, to me, is like taking off rose-colored glasses, if everybody knows that metaphor. When you stop romanticizing a situation and stop romanticizing a person and seeing it for what it is. Memory reconsolidation, absolutely. Okay, and neuroplasticity. Okay. The brain's ability to reorganize itself and form new neural connections plays a crucial role in moving on as individuals learn to adapt to change, develop resilience, and create new patterns of thought and behavior. Now, I'm going to talk about like some studies I found, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. Okay. So, studies in psychology have explored the effectiveness of various therapeutic approaches, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is called ACT, and mindfulness-based interventions in facilitating the process of moving on from past trauma, relationships, or negative emotions. I love that. I absolutely love that. Now, cognitive behavioral therapy, I think, is a little different. I know a little bit about that because I've just heard of it. I don't know, I'm chronically online. But I've heard a little bit about that. I think it differs from actual just regular talk-based therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I think, is where you recognize you have some kind of behavioral issue. There are lots of them. I can't think of examples right now. And you're working in therapy to correct that behavior. Oh, like a good example of that would be like overeating or like binge eating. Although that serves as like an addiction, it's a behavioral addiction. So cognitive behavioral therapy would help with like binge eating, stuff like that. I've never heard of acceptance and commitment therapy until now. I have to look into that. And mindfulness-based interventions. Now, if you're like me and you watch the show Intervention, you're probably thinking of like when people you love sit you down, write you letters and basically tell you you either have to go to rehab for some kind of drug of choice or they're going to cut you off. But that is not what it is. According to Google, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is a type of psychotherapy that combines mindfulness practices with cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to help people address depression and other concerns. Now, it says in our studies that mindfulness-based interventions help facilitate the process of moving on from past trauma, relationships, or negative emotions. This is why I say never ever underestimate the power of therapy. Never do it. Never. And if you haven't listened to therapy, go listen to it. Another study says neuroscientific research has investigated the neural correlates of resilience and adaptation, identifying brain regions involved in emotional regulation, decision-making, and social processing that contribute to individuals' ability to move on from adverse experiences. And these are the benefits of moving on from a scientific perspective. Improved mental health, moving on from past trauma, grief, or negative experiences have been associated with reduced symptoms of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as well as increased levels of happiness and life satisfaction. Enhanced resilience, successfully navigating the process of moving on, strengthens individuals' resilience, enabling them to bounce back from setbacks, adapt to change, and cope effectively with future challenges. Wasn't I just talking about that? Enhanced social functioning, moving on from toxic relationships or environments foster healthier interpersonal dynamics, stronger social support networks, and greater satisfaction in personal and professional relationships. And then there's enhanced cognitive functioning. Letting go of past grievances or regrets frees up cognitive resources, allowing individuals to focus on present moment experiences, pursue meaningful goals, and engage in more adaptive problem-solving strategies. Every single one of those hit on the nail for me when I moved on. Every single one of those. Like when you move on, like I said, like that burden is lifted off of your shoulders. So you can pursue meaningful goals. You can engage in more adaptive problem-solving strategies. You don't have to cry about that burden all the time. You don't have to sit on the train and cry like I used to. You can focus on the present moment, like it said, with enhanced cognitive functioning. It is scientifically better for you to move on. So why are you dreading doing it? Okay, so like I said in the beginning, in the intro, the biggest reason why I wanted to record this episode is because of something that just happened with my best friend. And also, before I get into this, I want to just take a little moment to pat myself on the back because I am being more vulnerable and talking more about my life and my experiences, even though I'm not really talking about me here, I'm talking about my best friend, but still, this is great. Okay, little pat on the back for me. Okay, so my best friend was in a relationship with this girl. I want to say our freshman year of high school. I think she met her. So, our freshman year of high school, my best friend met a girl and they started to date. And I don't remember much about like their talk. I don't remember so much about the specifics of the relationship as to like how they started dating or like how they clicked or whatever. I don't know. But I know they clicked and they just started dating and it was great. And it was just, I was so happy for my best friend. I was so happy for her to like be who she was and live in her truth. And it was a great situation. And after a couple of months or whatever, they didn't work out. As many high school couples do. Like no one really works out in high school, but that's my opinion. You know, it's kind of the truth, but whatever. They didn't work out and they broke up. And they both, I know, separately took that breakup. Like it was hard for the both of them. I was with my best friend. I also still kept in contact with her ex-girlfriend because we were all friends, and I could just see that they were both taking the breakup like really hard. Like it was really hard for the both of them. Well, my best friend stopped dating this girl, and when they stopped dating, you know, she had a couple of talking stages, but I think she really took the time to get to know herself and to really work on herself. And I'm very, very proud of my best friend. And she met a guy, I want to say last February, like of 2023. So probably like almost 6 or 7 months after that breakup. And they have been together since July of 2023. And they've been together almost a year now. They're healthy, very peaceful, happy relationship. I love her. I love him. Like I love them together. And I'm very happy for her. Well, we're downtown on Sunday, and I had this, like, genius idea because her ex-girlfriend follows this girl I don't like. So I was like curious, like, oh, maybe they know each other. So I call my best friend's ex-girlfriend and I ask her, I say, do you know this girl that you follow? And I was with my best friend. And she's like, oh, no, or whatever. Long story short, her and my best friend start talking again. And not in like a romantic way. But I guess they were just trying to like, I guess, get clarity about the situation or just like have that closure conversation that everybody craves to have with their exes. And I'm glad that they were both in the spot where they can have a conversation like, hey, do you want to talk about where this went wrong? Personally, I wouldn't have done it, but that's me. And it brought back old feelings on my best friend's ex-girlfriend. And my best friend today, we had a conversation about it. We're like texting back and forth, and I'm actually going to see her tomorrow. So there's going to be tea to that. So I might have to add a continuation of this saga because it's craziness. But I was texting my best friend about it, and my best friend was just telling me, like, hey, I don't want to deal with her feelings. I've told her that it's over between us. I'm not responsible for the fact that she can't move on. We're not together anymore, and I'm in a healthy relationship, and I love the person I'm with, and I don't want to jeopardize my relationship for her. And she set that boundary and just said, I don't think we should talk or that we should hang out or really try to pursue some kind of like cordial friendship or any kind of like friendship because of those feelings. And she set that boundary, and I was so proud of my best friend. And I think it just shows how far we have all come, because the old us, the old her would have just like continued to be friends with her or whatever. And I was so proud of her. And it just shows how much she's really moved on, how she's really like washed her hands and just said, I've done all I can do. I can't continue to put myself through the same old with you. I found somebody who makes me happy, who I can continue to spend time with, and I can't be stuck in freshman year drama with you. And I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of her. And that's what you guys, and I tell that story because it's like the perfect example of what you have to do. Even if you're not in a new healthy relationship like my best friend, you still have to set those boundaries because you are not going to heal in the same place that you were hurt. It's not going to happen. Like, so many people get shot by somebody and then ask them for a Band-Aid. Like, you're not going to get, your bullet wound is always going to be there because you're asking for a Band-Aid from the same person who shot you. And that's why it's so incredibly necessary to move on, to set those boundaries, to put that distance between us. Like, I'm not saying you have to hate your past significant other, that you have to hate who hurt you, or you don't have to hate anyone. Whether you're moving on from a romantic situation, whether you're moving on from something that really hurt you, from grief, from anything you have to move on from. You don't have to hate anyone. You don't have to love anyone. In my opinion, the goal is indifference. And I love to quote like Daily Taylor Swift quote from I Forgot That You Existed. It isn't love, it isn't hate, it's just indifference. You want to get to the point where you're indifferent about it. And that's what my best friend is. She doesn't love this girl. She doesn't want her back. She doesn't want to pursue the relationship again. But she doesn't hate her. She doesn't wish any ill intent on her. She doesn't want anything bad to happen to her. Despite what she said, I will always be there for you if you ever really need anything. But she's so indifferent to the point where she can set a boundary because her feelings aren't in it anymore. When you get to the point where you separate your feelings from logic, it gets so much easier. It gets so much easier. And that's what we talked about, like basically taking off those rose-colored glasses and separating yourself and having that enhanced cognitive functioning. And once you're able to like think about it better and stop romanticizing the person, the situation, the outcome, whatever it was, moving on is going to become so much easier for you. And I think I've proven that it's incredibly necessary to move on for emotional, for social, for psychological reasons. Like, it's so important and absolutely necessary to move on, to release that burden off your shoulders. Probably at the point now that you're like, okay, Alex, you keep telling me it's necessary to move on. You keep telling me I have to move on, I have to let go, I have to move on. But you're not telling me how to move on. You're not giving me any advice on how to move on. I thought this was my guide to girlhood, not you just telling me what to do without advice. That's, what I'm here for. I'm going to give you guys advice, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what helped me. So I'm going to tell a short story. I was on the bus the other day, and I talked about this last week in Venting. If you haven't listened to Venting, listen to it. But I was talking about how I was feeling really stuck about a certain situation and how I was pretty upset about something. So I'm on the bus and I'm thinking about this same situation. And I'm listening to Dear John, and I'm listening to The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived. And I get so upset, and I take out my phone and I decide to write a poem. And having that emotional release, I kid you not, made me feel so much better. Like, releasing that from my body in some kind of way, whether you have to like cry or like jump or like whatever you have to do, it felt so good. And I'm actually going to read it to you guys. Okay. You are one of the tallest men I've ever seen, your figure only imitated in statues carved by the Greeks, and your beauty, my God, I can write an entire book on your beauty alone. But inside such a beautiful body, as such a cruel, lifeless man, you have no heart, no soul, no depth. You have the ugliest heart known to man, and you have done nothing for me but fuck up my mental. You're so beautiful, but so is the devil. You're the tallest man I've ever seen, and probably the most beautiful man God would ever give, but truly, you're the smallest man who ever lived, and I hate you. And although that's incredibly rude and mean, and like you're probably like, oh my God, like that's so, like, why would you come for somebody like that? I have the right to write about it. He's pretty awful, okay? I want to write when I want to write. But it was so, like, the point of that story was, it was so relieving to like take my feelings, put them into words, write them down, and get them out. And I felt so much better after I did that. And I've committed to myself, every time that I feel like something is eating me up inside, I have an emotional release, and I'm going to write a poem about it. I have a notebook over on my dresser where I just write so much, like I just write poems about anything that comes to my mind, and I kind of stopped doing that. I used to do it every day last summer. And that's what I'm going to start doing again, because it helps me so much. It's my emotional release. Now, not everybody writes poetry, but you have to find some kind of way, in my opinion, to release your emotions. Whether it's, for me it's writing, but for some people it's, dancing, or I always encourage artistic emotional releases. I went to art school. I don't know, maybe that's just my bias, my prejudice. You can cry all the time. You can scream in your pillow. I know I have a lot of friends who can really draw, and they draw paintings that have like these beautiful symbols and metaphors for what they're going through. And I love it, and I think it's beautiful. Or there's so many other ways to release those emotions, but you can't carry that burden for the rest of your life. You can't do it. I'm going to sit down and process this feeling, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write me some beautiful, beautiful poems about this, because I have lots of ideas. So please don't underestimate me. And I think that's what you guys should do. You guys have to find something that will help you release what you're feeling, because to me it feels like I'm bottling something up and it's eating me up inside. And I don't want to let it continue to eat me up inside. I don't. So I found my release, and that's what you guys have to do. That's just the first step to moving on. That's just the first. But once you start to release these feelings and not continue to bottle them up, it gets easier and easier over time, because you have these beautiful poems. And then I send these poems to my friends, and I'm like, hey, look at this poem I wrote about so-and-so or whatever. And they love it. And they're like, oh my God, like this applies to me. And that that's part of the reason why I started this podcast. Like, it made me so happy. Like, I loved when I would write poems and send it to my friends, and they'd be like, this is so relatable. Oh my God, I love this. I love this. I love this. Like, I love your poems or whatever. Because I love being relatable. I love people relating to what I have to go, what I've been through. And like, I love relating to what other people have been through. And I just love our community of girlhood. And that's the biggest reason why I started this podcast. And it's the biggest reason why I write poetry. And I love using it also as an emotional release. And I think you guys should find yours as well. Okay, last thing. I want to talk about like the newfound freedom that I have now that I've let go of something I was stuck on for 2 years. And it has been amazing. And I'm just going to share some of the examples of things I've done since moving on. I started a podcast. I don't know if you guys listen to it. It's called Literally My Life, My Guide to Girlhood. I would have never started that podcast had I continued to be stuck and sad, and I would have never had the motivation or even the idea to start my own podcast had I not, moved on from that, had I continued to carry that burden with me. And so it's just, I'm so grateful that I got to do that. Like, I'm so happy I get to do that. I started taking a college course. I'm taking psychology at my local community college Tuesdays and Thursdays, and just learning, like, I'm putting myself out there more. I'm learning new things, I'm meeting new people, I'm trying new things, and it is so much easier for me to do that and to write again and to hang out with my friends again and to go to the gym and just do stuff like that when I feel like I'm not carrying around this burden, where I'm not weighed down all the time by this like infinite sadness, because I'm over it. And I feel like I have such improved cognitive function. I have such improved motivation. I'm happier in my daily life. I'm not as easily triggered or upset as I used to be. Like, I feel so much better in day-to-day life, to the point where I'm able to pursue things and do things that I never would have done had I continued to be stuck in a situation that wasn't serving me anymore. And I love my newfound freedom. I really, really do. I suggest you guys find it too. Okay, so in conclusion, I'm glad we got to talk a little bit about like the concept of moving on, the science behind it, my personal experience, or really my best friends, coping strategies, and embracing my newfound freedom. I hope this episode helped you guys. I'm glad I got to talk a lot about moving on, and I liked talking about the science behind it. I might do that some more. I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. I encourage you guys to reflect on your own experiences with moving on and embrace your journey of self-discovery and growth, because I know you guys can do this. I really know you guys can do this. Something is not serving you anymore, and although I used to hate to hear this, I promise you it's not the end of the world. It's really not the end of the world. It will get better. Life does not end at 17, although it feels like it. I love you guys so much. Before this episode ends, please follow at Literally My Life MGTG on Instagram. That's at Literally My Life MGTG on Instagram. I'm super active on there. That way we can stay in tune with each other. You can stay up to date with all things Literally My Life, my guide to girlhood. I will see you guys next week. I'm so excited to be having a guest. I believe next week or the week after that. I'm still planning that, but I'm so excited for that. I love you guys, and I will see you guys next Monday on my guide to girlhood Monday. Bye.